Okay, first off I was going to say that I would like to thank Fringeelements for toning down the insults. Yeah, his new video destroyed that. I was, however, given the wrong impression by his insults and comments on his page that his subscribers would be trolling in droves. His evil troll army has been very civil and professional, and I'm hoping mine are doing the same. I have learned a few things from his videos that would help me reconstruct my argument and bring in more evidence I forgot about, but his attitude just makes me want to ignore him and anything he says. I try and educate. He's on YouTube to pwn. I want to learn so I can be better and smarter. His drive to learn is to be better and smarter than everyone else. Even if a person is 100% wrong and you are 100% right, if you act like a total cock, which I'm sure you felt like you weren't being a total cock, I'm sure you could have been much harsher than you were, to them, you won't make any headway whatsoever. Why am I saying this? Because if your political views are the best way and 100% correct, it will never even come to fruition. You aren't selling it. You're just telling people how superior you are to them. Like the letter he wrote me about a diet plan that I could use because I had talked about some weight issues. It was written very cordially, but in the end it said, "Then you won't be such a fatty." It's like he has no idea how he's perceived, but then he probably doesn't really care. Having Asperger's, I have to constantly battle what is logical versus how people perceive me. The Greek philosophers believed that logic was the charioteer who guides the horses of emotion. We're finding out that logic is just atop an elephant, and logic has to be very clever to make sure the elephant will go the way it wants. Let up for a second, and the elephant of emotion will go exactly where it wants. You don't sell your political view at all. You just insult people for believing other things. Unfortunately, unless you change the majority of these people you consider idiots, your chances of the world ever switching to a non-state solution is never going to happen, because they'll just ignore you instead of discussing and debating. Popular consensus is needed, even in a dictatorship, because if a dictator can keep people comfortable enough to the point that they don't riot and overthrow him, people will put up with the abuses in place of stability. He has the consensus of everyone, even if they 100% disagree with him. Your point of view and libertarians treat people as purely individuals. Communists view people as just part of a group. Science shows we're somewhere in between. I have a feeling, though, that you will just, with that self-important smirk, tell me I'm a moron and I'm a baby and I cry by this statement. I would normally be excited and read through the treasure trove of new information you presented that I was unaware of, and perhaps even alter my opinion, but the way you presented your information made me want to just turn your channel off with your cocky grin and pretend you didn't exist. I'm sure you don't care, though. It was just that very attitude that gave me a bit of cockiness in my response video. I so wanted to show you just how little you knew and humble you a bit, and I underestimated your self-study ability. Under other circumstances, you would be the perfect person to bounce ideas off and see if an argument could hold water before using it because, as I said before, you're kind of a jack of all trades, studying many outlying subject areas. But I have zero desire to even talk to you about anything more now if I can help it. You're going to have to work on your salesmanship tactics. Get some marketing and sales downloadable classes and get some practice speaking to the average, more emotion-based viewer, or you'll just end up being a screaming old man persecuted by the state until you die. Now, it's been a long time since I thought about the Liberty Constitution, about 3 to 4 years now, and why the hell I even wrote it, and how I thought it was a good idea or even related to you. I knew at the time you were very anti-tax and anti-democracy. However, you were constantly making the point that the reason anarchic states were so chaotic is because the social fiber of the culture had been destroyed, as had been the infrastructure, so of course they couldn't live without a government in a time of anarchy. Your channel went on and on about how the state caused all the problems, and the only way big companies could get huge and create monopolies was because of government interference. However, you gave no indication at the time of how we could move a country from a statist solution to a non-state solution while maintaining all the benefits we had as a state. If you offer bionic limbs to someone, even someone with partially crippled limbs, they can still use to get around, you're going to have to make sure you can sell them on a plan that will ensure little to no pain, and the benefits they currently have of being able to walk and pick things up is not impaired. Because if you're wrong on how much better the bionic limbs are, they could have at least, been able to function. Now they have no arms or legs. The way to change a statist government into a non-statist one is by convincing the majority of people to switch to it, because otherwise they will still give power to a state, allowing them to tax you via force and never get by on your own wealth. The only solution was to create a step-down plan, one that would give people a working alternative while they figured out how to live without taxes, democracy, and government telling them what to do. The Liberty Constitution was to bring in the Ron Paulers and the original Tea Partiers of the time, before the Tea Party became an AstroTurf movement by the Koch brothers to give the rich more money. Over time, they would lose any dependence on government and become the entity that would make the government redundant. One of the founding parts of the Constitution was that the Liberty Constitution would never be forced on anyone, which would allow other alternatives to government to thrive, to the point that the Liberty Constitution would become obsolete if a better system came along using the free market style of ideas. One very strong danger I found from the economic meltdown of the recent recession was that giant corporations in a statist system could not be trusted without heavy regulation. I'm sorry, I know you and other libertarians really pushed that the 1920 crash occurred and the government did nothing and the crash cleared up in a year. That's true. However, I doubt either of us are expert historical economists to say with certainty that correlation was causation. I doubt either of us are informed enough on both the national and international market forces involved to make that big of an assumption. The crash of 1929, for one thing, had a huge international trade war going on, while the 1920 crash did not. I've also heard economists that accuse the 1920 crash as causing the 1929 crash to be even worse because it put off repercussions for later. I can't remember their logic for it exactly, but like many arguments, I couldn't put it off the table. For one thing, he was an expert in the field, and I was a mere amateur enthusiast. I understand the difference in our experience because I understand the difference in knowledge between myself and a biology enthusiast. Then multiply what he knows and I don't know by about 3 or 4 times that. In that subject, I'm pretty much an ignorant moron compared to him. I don't doubt you think you could go up against the guy, and I would love to see the debate. However, I'm not going to go into that because, once again, I don't even remember the argument. Also, types of market and economies are not something the entire economist community is convinced on. Unlike with evolution, where only a few fringe religious people deny it, economists still have many competing arguments. So I'm still not convinced that a state and an unregulated market can really exist together, because no matter what, with a state, it still would not be a free market. No regulation works great on the small scale, but when you have tons of money in a state, you can help write the laws yourself and get out of loopholes in the laws, so the person needs to be regulated in a society with the state. One of the main reasons why you're so against states to begin with. So we had to go from a regulated statist market to an anarcho-capitalist non-state. The more I studied, the more hopeless the idea of getting people to switch over seemed, so I began studying the liberal side to see if I could find any kinks in the system that we could exploit. I began realizing, as flawed as Fringeelements says the liberal version was, which it is, it's still not that horrible when done right. Our current government got the way it was via evolution. It has so far been the best of the worst systems in existence. He would probably disagree with me on that one, actually. No one is going to switch to a non-state without evidence that it works. It would require some massive level of instability to even consider trying an untested system of government as a last-ditch effort, just how one doesn't try an untested drug unless they're doomed to die anyway, so why not give it a shot? The chances of it actually happening the way it needs to, however, is probably not going to happen unless you have sold the idea to enough people. A ditch effort will likely go with a different, worse system. 300 million people in the US, and that 300 million people would suffer terribly if your plan didn't work or wasn't implemented correctly. Science, education, and infrastructure is the only thing that separates us from third world nations. Without those, we would be a third world nation. Of course, since these are falling apart in the US, you can extend your first world state by just stealing resources from other nations via giant military, which we do. To switch directly from a state system to a non-state would require careful, complex planning, or that infrastructure would fall apart, making us a third world nation. This chaos you discussed. It requires both a game plan to transition and a game plan to change everyone's mind if you're going to get us all to switch over. Until then, I think most people are going to go with a system they know works, even if it's normal or slightly crippling legs, versus theoretical, untested bionic legs with no game plan to attach them. You may have since come up with a game plan for that I'm unaware of. If you are, I'd love to hear it. But that is why I wrote the Liberty Constitution and why I thought it related to you.